Life. Life is the most precious commodity that we have, is it not? You can live life without things. Many of you would give testimony that you grew up a life. I know my dad shares often. They grew up 6 kids on the mission field, and they didn't go on deputation long because they didn't have a lot of money, and really grew up pretty, I guess what you would consider poor, living a meager life. Many of you could share a similar story, that you grew up with not a lot of things. Maybe on Christmas it didn't look like what my Christmas looks like at my house, was just a mountain of presents, and you almost feel guilty or embarrassed about how many things you bought for yourself and your family. Maybe you only had one present. Maybe you didn't have a present on Christmas. But you can live a life without things, but you can't have things without life, right? So life is the most important commodity we have. Our life consists, of course, of 3 aspects: the past, the present, and the future. Some have more past than future. Some have more future than past, and some have less future than what they believe. But everyone has life as their most precious commodity. Everyone has a life that consists of 3 aspects: past, present, and future. It only makes sense that if life is our most precious commodity, that we view it from the eyes of the wisest person that we know, God. That we view our life through the eyes of God. Think about the prodigal son for just a second. The prodigal son viewed his life, he viewed things very temporally, very short-sighted, if you would say. He said, hey, he went to his dad, I want all my inheritance right now. I want everything that you own, or everything that you own that's going to be mine. I want it right now. And he went out into the world and he blew all that money on different things that didn't really matter for a lifetime. He gets down to the point where he has no money. He's feeding the hogs just so he can skim a little bit out of the slop so he has something to eat. He's in the hog pen. He's thinking about everything that he's done up in his life up to that point. And what does he say in Luke 15, verse 17? And it says, and when he came to himself, meaning he started to think with some common sense, right? It says, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? He just started to use some common sense. He said, my father's servants live better and eat better than I do. What am I doing? It makes me, that whenever I think of that little phrase, what am I doing? It makes me think of the Bugs Bunny cartoon, where there's the little, the one where the little gremlin is hitting a nuclear warhead with a hammer. He's hitting it on the head. How many of you know what I'm talking about? You know that one? And he's sitting there, and the little gremlin is hitting that nuclear bomb on the head and trying to make it go off. And the Bugs Bunny, comes up to him. He's chewing his carrot. What's up, Doc? And so he grabs the hammer. He says, let me take a whack at it. And he winds up, and he's about to swing. And right before he hits it, he stops, and he yells, what am I doing? And that, I feel like, where the prodigal son got. He said, what am I doing? My father, his servants live better than me. If I go back, I know my father will accept me back. The prodigal finally viewed the life the way that his father did. And that's where we need to get as Christians, as believers, that we view our life the way that our Father does. That we look at our life not with our own ambitions through our own eyes, but we look at life the way that God does. One of the greatest problems in this world is that people do not take life seriously until it's nearly gone. Then they start to think about it. The less of something that you have, the more valuable it becomes, right? That's why gold and silver and those other things, those things are considered precious metals. Why? Why isn't dirt considered a precious metal, right? Or snow. Why? Because there's plenty of snow. There's plenty of dirt. The less of something you have, the more valuable it becomes. And too often people waste their lives. Then they get to the end and they say, ooh, I need to sober up. I need to start viewing life the way that God views it. I think of that when I love Diet Coke. I love ice cold Diet Coke. And when we're working on a roof in the summer, usually I'll take my little lunchbox cooler and I'll put a couple Diet Cokes in the bottom, cover those with ice, and then put my sandwich and stuff on top. And after that first morning push, maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock. We've stripped off probably at least half of the roof, and you're soaked through in sweat. The sun has come up. You're starting to get hot, and covered in sweat, covered in shingle granules. I go down, I grab my lunchbox, reach down, grab one of those ice-cold Diet Cokes, crack it open, and just slug almost the whole thing. And then the inevitable, right? Followed by a massive belch, right? But I really didn't taste that first 10 ounces of a 12-ounce can. And then that last little bit, I'll nurse that last couple ounces and really enjoy it because I don't want to crack open my next one for lunch. Really don't pay attention to that majority of the can, but you really kind of pay attention to the last. And that's what a lot of people do with their life. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon gets serious about life. That's really kind of the Ecclesiastes means preacher, and that's really the theme of his message is let's get serious about life. Let's sober up. In the message that he preaches, asking God's people, telling the listener to view life the way that God views it, he uses the word vanity or the phrase under the sun, meaning basically in the world, over 30 times. Solomon's view on life led to emptiness. He realized that the way that he was doing life wasn't working for him. Solomon's view on life had only brought him emptiness. It was vanity. But he realized that God's view on life, which was wisdom, led to joy, it led to fulfillment, and it led to satisfaction. The only place, follow this thought pattern, the only place that we get wisdom is from God. Jesus Christ is wisdom. That wisdom is available. Wisdom provides discernment and discretion for decisions. Decisions are more important than days of our lives. You can live a long life full of poor decisions, and your life would have been a waste. But you can live a short life full of right decisions and have accomplished much for God. In life, problems are not the problem. Problems come when we turn to anything, anyone, or anywhere other than God when a problem comes. Often we believe that the answer to our problem is to go back to the good old days, to go back to the past. You often hear, how many times have you heard it? When someone says, I wish I could go back to when, fill in the blank, right? Maybe they say, I wish I could go back to when I still worked at whatever it was, fill in the blank. I wish I could go back to when, fill in the blank, was my pastor. I wish I could go back to when I went to this and such church. I wish I could go back to when so-and-so was still around. I wish I could go back to when, before I lost my mom, my dad, fill in the blank. I wish I could go back to when life was simpler. I wish I could go back to when there were no smartphones. I wish I could go back to when people had more character. I wish I could go back to when people had morals. I wish I could go back to when kids had more work ethic. I wish I could go back to when kids showed more respect. I wish I could go back to when the Bible and prayer were still in school and we could read a list that goes on and on really endlessly about, I wish I could go back to when, fill in the blank. We've all said it. Solomon warned in verse 10 about that thought pattern. He said it would be a temptation to retreat back to the past, believing that times in the past were better than the times in the present. Look at it in verse 10. We're right there. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. It is impossible to retreat to the past. It doesn't matter how many gizmos and doofloppers people come up with. You are not going to be able to transport back in time. There's been times when I wish I could transport back in time and take back something I said, take back something I did. Say, well, if I could go back, I would not date so-and-so. I would not have said that to my wife. You know, I would not have whatever it was, fill in the blank, if you could go back in time, right? Sometimes, because of weak faith, we are so paranoid about the present and so fearful for the future that it seems the only safe place to live is in the past. I'll read that again because it's good and it's where some of us are at. And we have to overcome that. Sometimes because of our weak faith, we are so paranoid about the present and so fearful for the future that it seems the only safe place to live and dwell is in the past. Memory is a wonderful thing. Jesus gave us memory, right? If God didn't want us to remember the past, He would have made us like goldfish. It's said that goldfish only have a 2-second memory, right? So they're thinking, why am I here in this jar? Why am I here in this jar? Why am I, it's just got to be crazy to be a goldfish. If God didn't want us to have a memory, He wouldn't have given us one, but He did. Jesus encourages us to remember. Remember the ancient landmarks, and the Israelites often would make a memorial to remember things from their past. But Jesus doesn't want us to forget our past, but He also doesn't want us to live in the past. In verse 10, there's a question posed. Why was the past better than the present? This is a question that we're not supposed to ask. If we will not ask this question, here's where the message is getting to. Okay, that was all introduction. We won't have to ask ourselves that question. Why was the former days better than the present? If we heed the advice that was given in the previous 9 verses. You'll notice there's a theme in the first 9 verses. You'll see over and over and over again the word better, better, better. So that is the title of the message tonight, A Better Life. If we heed the advice in verses 1 through 9, we won't have to get down to verse 10 and say, why was the past better than the present? Because God will help us make our present the best. Let's take a look at it. Number 1, a good name is better. Verse 1, a good name is better than precious ointment. I remember sitting next to Kara in college when we first started dating. I met her at junior camp. We won't get through the whole story. There's definitely varying sides to the story about the first time we met. My side of the story, her side of the story is that I did not talk to her and I was very standoffish. My side of the story, I had a roommate or not a roommate, but a hallmate in college who was from her church that insinuated that they were an item. They were not, but he made it seem like it. So I wasn't going to, window shop on something that was already purchased. So I just, left my hands off and, bro code. And it turns out that he had done me wrong there. So we get to college. I find out that that's not the case. And so I find out she's on the market, but she's also like a limited edition and everyone else is trying to buy her up as well. So I figure if I'm going to put in my purchase order, I needed to do it sooner than later. So 2 weeks in, I asked her out to sit with me, super hot date, in the deaf section on a Wednesday night service at First Baptist. So we sat there and talked, and through the service, I could not tell you what was preached. We did get shushed in the deaf section, which was interesting. But someone turned around and said, "Shh, hypocrite." So we started sitting together in chapel. Well, she had this perfume that was just called Dream Angel's Desire. And I tell you what, she was my dream angel, and I had desire for her. It was working. And so the Bible says a good name is better than precious ointment, something that smells good, something that's desirable. The Bible says that when we do certain things, that it's a sweet-smelling savor in the nostrils of the Lord. How when Jesus was on earth, how she broke the ointment and poured it on his feet, the expensive ointment. So ointment back then, something that smelled good, was very expensive. It was a precious commodity. He said a good name is better than precious ointment. Having a good name refers to having character, having integrity, and having decency. So many people today are concerned with what others think about them that they're willing to do anything, including lowering their integrity, lowering their decency, lowering their morals, lowering their standards to make a name for themselves. But we're admonished to follow God and allow Him to take care of our name. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 1, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. How do we have a better life? By choosing a good name, by choosing the high road. And oftentimes, sadly enough, when we choose to do what's right, it may seem initially like it's actually choosing a poor name, because doing what's right is so far from what everyone else is pushing us to do. But If we just follow what God wants to do, He'll take care of our name, and in long term, He'll make sure that it's a good name. Number 2, we see the day of death is better. And what's interesting, I'll just preface a few of these by saying, oftentimes we read through this and we read God's pattern for a happy life, and usually there's some things like this that don't make sense to us. And we think, well, why would the day of death be better? That doesn't make any sense. But do you think that God has a view of life that we don't have? Do you think that He knows what is better? And do you think that the things that we've been taught, often not in church, but taught by the world and that are lived out in the world, they're not bringing happiness? And probably when we do what is going to be a better life according to God, that it's going to really kind of be opposite to what we've seen played out time after time. The day of death is better. The end of verse 1, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. If we believe the Bible, which I do, I believe the Bible in its entirety. If we believe that heaven's real, and if we're looking at life from God's perspective, then we understand what Paul was saying in Philippians chapter 1, verse 23, when he said, "For I am in a strait betwixt two." He said, "I'm between a rock and a hard place, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better." Paul said, I'd rather just be with the Lord. I'd rather just be in heaven. And I'm sure there's a lot of us at different times in our lives where we felt that way. We felt, you know what? The world is just in such a bleak place. Wouldn't it be better just to be in heaven where there is no sin? Maybe in the middle of loss, we say, you know what? It'd be so nice to be in a place where there is no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more tears. It'd be better just to be in heaven again, or be in heaven with Jesus. That's what Paul said. And if for a believer, the day of death is better. Now, the passing of a loved one brings sorrow. And initially, it's a difficult thing to deal with, even though we have the confidence that we'll see them again. But the day of death is better, because for a believer, our life only gets better in going to heaven. A better life, first of all, choosing a good name. The day of death. Number 3, the house of mourning is better. Verse 2, it is better to go in the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. This phrase, the house of mourning, last week in the Sunday school lesson, Brother Kurt was talking about the word patohos, mourning, as in, what is that definition? It's regret over sin. That's not this word here. This is, in a true sense, the house of mourning, meaning you're at a funeral. You're at the burial site of someone who has passed. Hold on a second. Why is the house of mourning better than the house of feasting? The thought here is that there is more to be learned from the death and a funeral than at a nice meal at a restaurant. It's not encouraging a morbid fascination with death and sadness, but it is an exhortation to pay attention and learn from the inevitable losses around us. The Bible says it's appointed unto men once to die. We know that everyone that we know, if we live long enough, is going to pass. And what it's saying here is it's better to be in the house of mourning, because we will learn from the passing better than just sitting around having a meal together. I personally can think of many lessons about life and people that I have learned through observing loss or people in loss. I'll share just a couple that I thought of off the top of my head. Was in a funeral. I'll never forget this. 12 years old. I was at a funeral in Sheboygan. Somebody I don't know. It was I think some folks who had a grandma pass, and they didn't have a preacher. So Ted had asked Dad if he'd preach the funeral. Dad took me with him. We went up there, and we were in the funeral home up there in Sheboygan. Dad preached the message. Message was over, and I had been to quite a few funerals up to that point. And really, as a side note, as a church congregation, I take for granted how many funerals I've attended as a pastor, but also just as a pastor's son. But just as a church, we generally attend more funerals because we know more people that pass. We have a bigger, and a lot of folks in the world, they have not attended many funerals. There was a when Bonnie died, Bonnie Rickle, this past year, her daughter, older than me, 30 years old, 30-something, she said, this is the first funeral I've ever been to. That's just odd to me. I've probably been to, I don't know, maybe close to 100 funerals. So I had in my mind kind of what was going to happen after the message was over. You know, you kind of pray and everybody goes through and pays their last respects. Well, this was a funeral of a lady who was not saved. A funeral for a family who were 100% unchurched, didn't know the Lord. It was very different. There was, here in the Bible when it describes what hell is going to be, when there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth and wailing, I got just a little bit on earth of what that's going to be like. Just screaming and crying. And a teenage granddaughter that was trying to pull grandma out of the casket. Just a completely different situation than the hope that we have as a believer. Now, at the funeral of a believer, there's crying, there's sadness, there's nothing wrong with that. But the hopelessness that I saw there, something that I will never forget, and really what it taught me is that the lost have no hope. And it really, time to time when I think about that scene in my mind, it helps me be compassionate to the people who have no hope. To those there, maybe at a funeral or when I knock on their door, to realize that without the gospel, without at least the opportunity to receive Jesus Christ as their Savior, they have no hope. I learned that in the house of mourning. I've also learned a few other things. We hear all the time, and we joke from time to time, boy, it'd be nice if we could have a funeral where I could be in the casket but not really be gone. That way I could hear all the nice things that everyone said about me and then sit up and say, hey, how come you didn't say that about me when I was here on earth? And I have sat through testimony after testimony after testimony at funerals for people just, lavishing on, he was such a... But you can make a hardened criminal seem like he was a saint at a funeral, right? You only got everything good to say about him. But that taught me that I need to vocalize more often how appreciative I am of people, what they mean to me, how they bless me, and let them hear that while they're still alive, not just say it at their funeral when they're already gone and it really means nothing. One other thing, everyone deals with loss and grieves differently. Realize that some people internalize it, they look fine. I've seen people at a funeral who seem to have lost someone very dear to them, a spouse, a child, and they seem happier than they've ever been before. They're not sad, they deal with it differently. Others, they can't get it in a word edgewise, and they're just crying nonstop and everywhere in between. Everyone deals with grief. Everyone grieves differently. And that has taught me as a pastor, as a person, to be respectful to that, to know that, to go into that with knowledge and try to comfort the ones that are just overcome with emotion, need comfort. Maybe laugh and joke around and tell stories with those who that's how they deal with grief and everywhere that kind of falls in between. Those are all just a couple of lessons that I've learned in the house of mourning. And I've shared some wonderful meals together with folks and chatted over a meal, but a lot of more life lessons, important lessons I've learned in the house of mourning. The house of mourning is better. A couple more and we'll be done here. Sorrow is better. Sorrow is better than laughter, verse 3. For by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. Often life's greatest lessons are learned in failure, not in success. When I was in 7th grade, my first opportunity to go to ACE student convention, I had never sung a solo before, but I signed up to sing male solo. And Mom gave me this piece of music. As a 12-year-old boy, it was by the Bill Rice Ranch. My faith has found a resting place, but it was an arrangement. My faith has found a resting place, not in device nor creed. I remember singing it. I thought I was going to just crush that song, and I did, in my mind. Came time to go and get awards, and I got 4th place. And in my competitive nature, 4th place did not sit well with me at all. And I told myself, next year, I will win 1st place. And that year, between 7th and 8th grade, I worked a lot on stretching my range, on cutoffs, on controlling my vibrato. And I read the judges' forms, and I took, any of you who watched the Michael Jordan interview, I took that personally. And I really worked at improving my vocals. The next year, 8th grade, I sang, and they have what they call command performances, where they enjoy something so much that they ask you to sing it in the big chapel. I got a command performance, which insinuated that I won first place, and I did. That felt good. 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I won first place, and I kind of really didn't improve a lot because, hey, I won first place. I was good enough for first place. I don't really need to work on my vocals. 11th grade comes around. I sang, and this sucker by the name of Sam Jones from Freedom Farm got first place. And we were there, and I was kind of joking around. Yeah, I won first place, yada, yada, yada. Well, it came down to just the two of us. And second place in male vocal solo, Drew Rogers. Oh, that did not sit well with me at all. Mostly because I had been, insinuating that I was going to win first place, watching Sam Jones walk across the platform and take my first place solo medal in 11th grade. Again, I said, that will not happen again. Next year, I will crush Sam Jones. And 11th to 12th grade was the single, I'm like, what a generic name. How do I get beat by a guy named Sam Jones, right? It's like you get beat by Ed Sample, right? So I said, I will improve my vocals. And 11th to 12th grade, Mom worked with me, and I became a little more open to criticism. And I have really never made any greater jump in my vocal ability and my musical ability than I did from 11th to 12th grade, because I did not want to get second place again. And I started singing maybe a little bit different style of music, really worked at it, won first place, and there was a big convention that year, got the command performance, and it was just awesome. I sang, what song was it? He Gave Himself for Me. Man, that felt good, because I had put the work into it. But I learned and put in the work the most in the 2 years that I didn't win first place. The years that I won first place, I really didn't need to work on it, right? And that is what this verse is talking about. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. We often learn in tragedy. We often learn in difficulty, in failure, more than we do in success. We are often more serious about life when we have fallen into sin. We realize where we're at, and now we have to turn to the Lord and say, Lord, forgive me. I need help. We're often more serious about life when we fail our spouse or we fail our children. And your child says something to you or does something to make you realize that you've failed them big time. And all of a sudden you think, man, I need to change. I need to do better. We usually get more serious about life when we've made a big financial mistake, right? When we do something and realize, oh man, I'm going to have a hard time digging out of this hole. Or when we fall away from God, or when we stop attending church and you stop serving. Or someone that God, here, this has happened to me a couple of times, someone that God has impressed you to be a witness to, and you put it off, and you put it off, and you put it off, and then they pass away. Is there really, in the grand scheme of things, is there anything worse than that? Is there any lower point than that as a believer? You think, I missed the boat. If that person didn't get a witness from someone else, that person is going to be in hell because of me. Because of their sin, but because I didn't give them a witness. We often get more serious about life and a failure. Our sorrow, our failure can make us better. 2 more. What will make us live a better life? First of all, choosing a good name. The day of death. The house of mourning. The sorrow. Number 5, the rebuke of the wise is better. Verse 5, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. No one likes to be told what to do. How many of you love it when someone just sits there over your shoulder and tells you what to do? All right, good. Because you would be weird if you did. No one likes to be told that they are... How many of you like it to say that someone to tell you that you're wrong? How many of you like it when someone points at you and touches you in the chest and said, you are wrong? Oh. One of the few times I've ever wanted to just lay hands on my dad, and he pointed at me and he touched my chest. And I think, oh, sorry, Zucker, don't touch me. Don't touch me. Tell me you're wrong, fine. Don't touch me. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong. Nobody likes to be corrected. Our old sin nature rejects rebuke. But there will never be learning without rebuke. There will never be, all criticism is constructive criticism. I've tried to learn from that. There's always a sliver of truth in all criticism. Now, sometimes people say stuff that is just completely false. It's just completely, for lack of a better word, baloney. But there's always a sliver of truth, something that you can take from that, because whether it's true or not, that's how that person feels, and that's how you're projecting. You can always learn from criticism, and I always try to learn from everyone. Every man's my teacher. You can learn from people what to do, and you can learn a lot from people about what not to do. You say, you know what, I don't like the way that person lives their life. I'm not going to do that. Everyone's your teacher. No one likes to be told what to do, but without rebuke, there's no learning. Notice this, in verse 6, as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. It took me a minute to figure out what this was saying. A crackling of thorns under a pot. Just a noise that, you ever throw maybe some weeds or some dry leaves or some little timbers? You throw those into a fire. What do? They crackle. They quickly flame up. They make a little bit more noise than the rest of the wood that's burning. And a little bit flashier, a little bit brighter flame, but then it burns out really quickly. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, talking about the way that they would prepare their food, so is the laughter of a fool. This also is vanity. It makes a lot of noise, makes it a little brighter for a minute, but really provides no lasting benefit. It doesn't make the fire any hotter. It doesn't make the fire last any longer. Satan tries to keep our minds preoccupied with everything that carries little weight, so that we'll be unwilling to hear that which could help us. The crackling of fools, the things that don't really carry a lot of weight. And oftentimes in a group like this on Sunday evening, if you're here on Sunday night, just in general, you're going to be a pretty faithful, dedicated Christian. There's a certain amount of things that you're going to do or not going to do in your Christian life. Satan knows that. So Satan knows that, maybe trying to tempt everyone in this room with, like drugs, crack. It's probably not going to get a lot of us to trip up. Because, I don't know, it's just there and I wanted to try it. It's not going to happen. But Satan knows that he could get me to get really drawn into the NFL season, and that I could spend a lot more time from September to, for the Packers season, January, or December, spend a lot more effort and energy watching the Packers and listening to podcasts about why they stink than listening to extra studying and doing extra reading. And Satan will put things that aren't necessarily wrong in front of us to make us listen to what? The crackling of the thorns, the things that don't really matter. They flame up for a second, but they don't really have any long-term value. And often Satan gets us to sin, not by putting things that are wrong in front of us, but by putting things that really have no eternal value in front of us. And we choose those things. We choose to watch Netflix or Hulu for an hour instead of read the Word or to pray or to spend time with our wife or spend time with our children. And he can get us to choose to do something good to keep us from doing something better. That's what that verse is saying, is the rebuke of the wise is better. Lastly, the end of a thing is better. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. If we're looking at this verse and we were looking at all this, how to live a better life, right? How to make better choices, how we can get to the end of our life or in the middle of our life and not have to ask the question, why was my past better than the present? And if we're looking at this verse in context of a life, better is the end of a thing than the beginning. Meaning the end of our life is better than the beginning. As we begin to age, we begin to run out of energy. And I know that is not spoken from experience because I'm 28 years old. I'm in the prime of my life. I have as much energy as I'm ever going to have. Unfortunately, I'm as athletic as I'm ever going to be. And it's only downhill from here, right? But those of you who are getting older, in your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and further on your 80s, I'm just kidding. But you get older and older and you don't have as much energy. You can't stay up as long. And as this happens, you begin to, first of all, desperately want your life to count. But the end of your life is better than the beginning. Why? Because in your old age, you have more influence over more people than what I have. The words that you speak carry more weight. If I were to sit down with Jack, next to my grandpa, myself, and Jack are sitting at a table. Jack's on one side, my grandpa and myself are sitting here. And I were to pull up and say, Jack, you get to ask one of us how to have a long, successful marriage. Who are you going to ask? The guy who's been married for 54 years, not the guy who's been married for 7, right? Just by default, the lifetime of experience and wisdom. If I could figure out how to keep my wife around for 54 years, I'm interested how you did that. And I want to ask you some questions. You get older, you get to the end of your life. And oftentimes people say, well, when they retire, when they start drawing their retirement check, they retire on the Lord too. And they say, well, my effectiveness for Christ is done. Really, the opposite is true. The effectiveness for Christ for you is just beginning, because there are a lot of young people like myself who look up to you and who can draw a lot of wisdom from you. Because now I've been a teenager, now I've been a young adult, but I've never been in my 30s. I've never been in my 40s or 50s or 60s. I've never had teenage children. I've never had adult children. I've never been a grandparent. I've never been a great-grandparent. So I still stand to learn a lot from those of you who are older. But if you just check out and become distant, these kids, they're just obsessed with their smartphones, and that's all these kids care about, and you just shut down and, throw the baby out with the bathwater, then you're never going to be able to let the end of your life, in a spiritual sense, be better than the beginning of your life. And I'm asking you folks who are in a different stage of life than me, in your retirement age, is don't let the former days be better than the days right now. Be the Tom Brady of Christians. Just never retire. Just never quit. Just keep playing every year. We don't know what's going to go on in the NFL this year, but we know Tom Brady's going to come out of retirement and play again. All right? And that's what I want. That's what I want you to do. I want you to just keep going. Play the fourth quarter. The most important game. The most important quarter of any sport is the fourth quarter. My grandpa and I were watching the basketball game last night, and Florida wait, and he said, well, you watch this. It'll get down to the end of the game, and it'll be decided in the last minute. And it was. And really, your life is going to be decided in the last few minutes, in the fourth quarter. And you ought to play your hardest, dig your deepest, and invest the most in the fourth quarter. The end of your life is better. How do we live a better life? How do we not get to the point where we ask ourselves, why was my past so much better than the present? We choose all those things that are better, that are better, that are better.